boss, Hayden Blackburn, Executive Director of Tech Fort Worth and Cowtown Angels. And Hayden, I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Devin. It's a pleasure to be here. As she said, feel free to throw out questions throughout this. I do have a good amount of material. We can always riff on some of these pieces as far as to look at each of these angles. We have a good mixture of entrepreneurs, service providers in here. So we'll hope be able to walk away with something that you can pass on to your network, put into practice. Even though it says pitch deck, presentations are just part of doing business. You're presenting something, you're trying to deliver this information. This is from the lens of trying to get people engaged with a new venture or coming to be a part of a team of something new and how to kind of communicate that. So I've got some resources that I'll point everybody to, walk through kind of some three main areas. Let me pull this up and we'll be good to go. So use the chat, open to all kinds of questions throughout this. But again, thank you to Whitley Penn. They've been a long-term sponsor of Tech Fort Worth and TechNest. So it's a pleasure to have them supporting us through the month of November as we produce this webinar on a weekly basis. But I've got three areas: basics, tips and tricks, and a little bit of investor speak, because it's a whole different language out there. And the basics and tips and tricks, there's probably a bleeding of some tips throughout as well, because my first tip is really strategize first. If you're trying to get to where you're going to make a presentation or you're going to present about your venture, go to a whiteboard, map it out, use sticky notes. Those are much easier to adapt than a blank PowerPoint file. If that's where you're starting, don't hurt yourself trying to do that. It's a blank canvas. It's much easier to kind of just map out your storyboarding. And you'll hear me talk about this a lot. You're telling a story as a presenter and delivering something not just in statistic form, but story to pair those together. So take those sticky notes, use a whiteboard, make it adaptable, avoid the blank PowerPoint slides. Not until you've at least mapped out your content. But respect your audience. I mean, be empathetic of them. Know that they won't be able to absorb as much information as you're able to communicate. They may be able to retain 50% if you're lucky, but through some of the data and statistics, you might be able to increase that. So resist being defensive. If you have a presentation and a Q&A, kind of measure yourself on how well you respond to awkward moments, to challenges, to your beliefs or statements that you've made, but resist using acronyms and industry jargon. So I'll revisit a couple of these later into this presentation as well. Because you want to respect them because there's multiple learning styles. If we did a tally of how many people are visual learners, we probably maybe have half the room are visual learners, more need it written out, some need to experience it to really retain it. For me, I'm a pen and paper person. I can't type it up, I need to write it down. That helps me retain. And so I will summarize information that I'm hearing and push that out that way. So be aware of those different multiple learning styles and address that through a presentation and how you're pacing yourself. But when it comes to kind of, especially investor decks and presenting to somebody that you're hoping to become an investor or a team member, just trying to get somebody involved in your venture, there's two types of decks that you're creating. One, a reading deck that is delivered to that individual and you're not in the room presenting it. So it does need more information in there to connect the dots and allow the reader to make the conclusions that you're wanting them to make, and not that they are jumping to an assumption or wrong conclusions because there's just not enough information in there. So that is a much different slide deck than one that you're going to get in front of the room and present on. It will be lean, it will have low word counts, it'll have large fonts, it will allow your listener to listen to you and not read. These are just kind of the standard things that we hear as presenters is don't put a paragraph up there on the slide. Use that in an opportunity to communicate to them and share the points that you're wanting to and don't distract them. But it also kind of a point that I'll make later is just kind of simplifying the slides, having one key point to each of them so it's easy to connect the dots as you go through. Once you start to put 2 or 3 main points onto a slide, it can overwhelm and you forget one of those as you move forward. So really trying to know the difference between what you're trying to build. For me, it's almost easier to start with the reading deck, put all the information on there and then strip it back. because at some point I'm going to need to create that reading deck that I'm presenting to somebody. But I'm probably going to have an easier chance of doing more information and pulling it back. Design matters. Consistency, clarity, clutter-free. Find a design that really represents your brand, connects with your audience, does not distract from the information that you're trying to present. My deck tonight is minimalist, white background, black text, super, super simple, but try to build some consistency in it. And then use visuals. Look at your layout, use your typography, the color, images and photography, visualize data. If you are developing a company and you have very specific fonts and typography, like fonts and typefaces that you're using, always save your PowerPoints or any file that you're creating as a PDF. If you're sending this to another audience, that's going to protect those typefaces to show the same way as you designed it and saved it. If you send that PowerPoint and I'm using this typeface Nonento and you don't have that, it's going to come out as just jumbled and inconsistent with how that is. And that's going to throw off your game if you're having to do that type of presentation. Now in a virtual setting, you control what's going up on the board and onto the screen. So you don't have to do as much on that, but if you still are sending it over to an audience, share that PDF version of it to retain consistency. But a little bit more on this visualized data. There's this great book. There's actually two books that I'll recommend. One is this book, Slideology from Nancy Duarte. Data slides are not really about the data. They're about the meaning of the data. Creating stories that you can pull out of that data that will connect your audience to it instead of just like, here's a giant number, be amazed with this number, but expand on that. So the book, I mean, it's really about all kinds of presentations, has case studies, talking about how they mapped out their content, how they're visualizing it. Highly recommended for anybody that's consistently having to design slides for any presentations, whether that's for you as an entrepreneur or a service provider. Wealth of knowledge within that book. But as much as we talk about design, content is king. Don't pass go until you've mapped out your content, know what is going to be covered, because if you start with a blank PowerPoint slide, it is very tempting to go, oh, and I create a template of a design and then build from there. You've already kind of put so much mental energy in the decision about the design before you've started to decide about what content is going to go in what order and kind of logically, rationally, in trying to point to maybe some emotions to try to tap into multiple levels of connection with your audience. So content is king and always will be. Excellent design with no content still won't click as much. They may just feel good about really good design. The second book, which is actually on my credenza back here, is Get Backed. The content that I'm going to cover next is from this book from Evan Baer and Evan Loomis. They surveyed thousands of entrepreneurs that raised capital and found the commonalities in the decks that they used. And they came down to 10 core slides. Now, this is not saying that only have 10 slides. I'm not the type of person that says, oh, you must have this many slides for this many minutes of presentation. It's too prescriptive. If you're playing to large fonts, reduce count, if I'm presenting one idea per slide, your slide number is going to increase. But it's about, am I covering the right material? And I'll cover in a couple of tips later about how to really maximize that. So this book from Harvard Business Review and their library, highly recommended. If you're raising capital, grab it. It's the most robust that you can find. But they got the 10 slides. And there's a couple of tweaks that you can make, especially on these first three. The overview, big picture, a giant visual and a tagline of your company, capture the attention and a visual representation of kind of what represents your company at its core. Then touching on either starting with the problem or the opportunity. If it's an investor, you may hit the opportunity hard and fast at the beginning, big opportunity for all. There's an urgency to address this. Maybe it's an opportunity in the industry, an opportunity for movements in the economy and customers' behaviors. There's a lot of opportunities all the time. And as an entrepreneur, you're kind of doing a little bit of trend hunting and seeing if there's a trend that you're able to ride and capitalize on and point to this opportunity, but you're pointing towards the size of that opportunity to then show the depth of that problem. Real and validated, the bigger, the better. not a stubbed my toe type of problem, bleeding by my neck type of problem. Those are the ones that have urgency and validity to them. And if you're pointing also to data that you have from third-party sources about the size of that problem, validated through study and research, that's not just your own assumptions. This is a true part of trying to find product market fit, that the problem is defined in a way and you love that problem enough that your solution will adapt based on that problem and the individuals that are experiencing it. So that's kind of the first three. It then gets into your solution. I always call it the napkin drawing, but a visualization of how your solution is used in a user's context. A very simple, stripped back, very few words to visualize that for all those visual learners. And as you just start to describe that verbally, able to walk them through that and how that behaves. No matter if it's a software play or a device or a service, you're able to show how a user uses your solution, product or service to their benefit, but really highlight those key attributes. And really there's a couple of words that I'll describe that I'm using because I know I said avoid jargon, but you're starting to point towards a moat. Your defensible position as an entrepreneur that you're building that creates a competitive advantage even before you talk about your competitors. So when you're talking about your solution, maybe you're hinting at, as you get into a traction slide, hey, we have a patent, we have patentable technologies within this, or we have this many years of industry experience that cannot be recreated overnight. But you're talking about your position in the marketplace and where your solution fits in that space going into this traction. Traction can be many things, but it's really about those achievements. What have you accomplished so far that will de-risk it for an investor? That shows that you're not just at idea stage, that you'll be able to move it past that into prototype, into potentially getting product market fit. And product market fit could come from mostly a customer buying your product or service. That's product market fit and showing validation because somebody pulled out their pocketbook and said, yes, I will purchase this. And also prior to that ability to kind of sell directly to a customer, it's really about, I've gotten this much momentum, I've gotten this many interviews directly with customers that have validated our solution. I've got this many people signed up on a beta list to test this once we do launch. I've got a signed partnership or letter of intent with a partner. So anything that you can measure that you've accomplished since the idea was born to today when you're presenting will help point towards your traction and how much you've been able to de-risk this. Talking about the customer or market, segments and size, maybe even a persona if there is an early adopter of your solution that you could pinpoint, whether that's a B2B or a B2C play, pointing to what's that profile and persona of that ideal early adopter of this product. And then the TAM, SAM, and SUM. So I have got the definitions of those. So for everybody that doesn't know these acronyms, and I don't expect everybody, total addressable market, the dollar value of the entire market that you're able to go after. That may be a global market. Serviceable available market, the product you can actually reach, that may be more geographically limited than global, especially in the first phases of the company. And then serviceable obtainable market, the portion that you believe you can realistically capture. You'll commonly see it in these three circles, kind of going smaller and smaller because you present the total addressable market. Hopefully it starts with a B. Billion is definitely better than a total addressable market of 1 million. You can do bottom up scaling and sizing of the market, or top down. Look for the resources as far as studies out on marketplaces, and that means you're needing to find the market that you're in so you can kind of see if there's research that's been pumped out that's stating what the size of that market and what the compound annual growth rate of that is. So there's a lot of data points that you can point to towards the size of the market and the opportunity and where it's growing. So there's a lot of information out there on the internet for free, kind of diving into this. There's other ways to visualize the market, but this is a common one that many people can digest very quickly. And be sure to list your sources of where that data comes from. Now, continuing, you get into the competition. A visualization is a great way to kind of visualize or really communicate about your competition and what differentiates you from them. You'll commonly see it in a matrix, kind of competitors on the top, features and benefits and key attributes on the left, who's got what, who doesn't have the others. How do I stack up against them as far as the competitive advantages? And especially if those key benefits and features are directly related to what the customer is searching for, not what you're hoping the customer is searching for. You'll also see kind of a radar map, X and Y coordinates, heat mapping in radar, kind of where the market is pushing towards. Find two kind of areas that are pushing your market into new directions as far as innovation. And you're hopefully in that top quadrant, kind of maximizing those two things that are pushing innovation in your market and showing that others are falling behind, but there's probably some competitors. So you're probably seeing these. Because we're recording this, I didn't bring examples of companies, so I didn't want to go against kind of our thing of not sharing it on that. So there's a lot of examples out there to be found of how to visualize the competition, but make sure that others can understand it very quickly. It's legible, it highlights the things that you want to the most, and maybe there's only 4 or 5 features that you're needing to communicate, not all 10. Going into the business model, if you're not familiar with the business model canvas, another highly recommended tool to fleshing out your kind of business model and how that behaves. This slide's really not about visualizing that entire canvas. This is really more about how you make money, your revenue streams, and what is the strength of your business model, external and internal elements that are lining up and strengthening your business model and create that moat and help create that moat and help you identify opportunities in the marketplace as macroeconomic trends happen. Then going into the team, day-to-day, board of directors, and advisory board. Even if you're a co-founder and a team of 2, you want to find ways to fill gaps on the team, and advisory board is a great way to do it. Non-governance and industry experience. Maybe you're a first-time founder and investors are looking for those with a track record. Maybe you bring on an advisor that has scaled and exited a company before that you're able to tap into and get advice from as you work to grow and scale. It's an advisory type of pathway. And then the board of directors are really sharing just kind of what the structure of the company is, who's already on that board, how the governance is happening on that. But you want to be able to display and communicate on all 3 of those levels. Most early stage companies are mostly just communicating the day-to-day and the advisory board levels. And that's okay. Use of funds is always one that you'll want to share. What's the amount that you're trying to raise? What's the breakdown in the use of those? What are you going to use those funds for? And then what's the vehicle in terms? Vehicle meaning, is this a priced round for equity? Is this a convertible note? Is this a SAFE, a simple agreement for future equity? What's the vehicle that an investor is looking to invest in under this raise amount and the terms associated with that? So there's a lot to like really focusing on the language of angel investing and VCs and private equity on that slide in specific. And you'll want to know that very detailed as you get into presentations, and so you don't fumble on those data points. So those are the 10 core slides that they found from, I think it was about 2,000, if not a little bit more than 2,000 slide decks that raised capital of what they all included. Now, they all had other data points in them, and it was just specific to those companies. Do you need to have your patents listed? Do you need to have your product roadmap because it's showing the development timeline? And especially if you're going to have future rounds of raising capital, it'll associate with that roadmap. Geographic growth plans, customer acquisition strategies. Exit strategy, really, I'm surprised wasn't one of those core slides, because if you're raising capital from an investor, they're going to ask you that immediately after the presentation if you're not talking about what's your exit strategy for the company and what that timeline looks like. If you already got customers, use those quotes to your advantage. That gives you an opportunity to talk about a customer story and experience with the company. So build the deck to your benefit. And if you do have a time crunch and restriction for the presentation, be sure you're always hitting these high points. Because if you're getting Q&A, they may be asking you about these things, and you can use that. I'm going to share this a little bit later, but I'll go ahead and share it. Create an appendix of slides. So at Cowtown Angels, we give 10 minutes of presentation. I can't cover everything in 10 minutes. It's just not possible. But what I can do is tease things, and then most likely they're going to ask me to further give an explanation to that tease in the Q&A. I can use appendix slides to give greater detail about each of those points. So maybe some of these are in the appendix. I'm able to pull those up as investors or any audience members are asking questions, to use that to my benefit, to not bog down and try to feel like I've got to cram everything into a 10-minute presentation, but I know I have a Q&A. Now, if you're going to present your financials, there are definitely some best practices. Include a forecast 3 to 5 years out, high-level profit and loss statements in chart form, simplified, not too many data points, paired with visuals showing milestones and development roadmap. And this is really specific for those in like biotech, life sciences, medical devices. Show that roadmap, and especially milestones and capital raises with that. And then include those key performing indicators, like your gross profit margin, what happens to that over time with what you're projecting with your company, and then just try to keep it as simple as possible. Too much information will overwhelm. Use the same strategy I just said. Keep it simple, and then give a full detailed one in your slide deck in the appendix, so they can go into more detail on that. But this one, we talked about earlier, become a storyteller. Hone that skill, create a stable of stories. There's 4 different types of stories they talk about in Get Backed, and I'm a fan of each of them, but use them to your benefit and find a way to integrate it into your presentation, or even just when you're in a conversation with somebody. So the first, this origin story, kind of the hero's journey. You're living a life. This is your story, why you were drawn to creating this new venture, to create this value in the marketplace and for your customers. You accepted the challenge, you take bold action, you got this new sense of purpose, and you're motivated. You're highly motivated to create this. And everybody's looking for that. I mean, an investor is investing, especially angel investors, in almost equal amounts in the venture and the team. The team is absolutely key to the venture succeeding, and so they got to believe in you. Your origin story to an investor is really going to either show them that you have that passion and that motivation to go through the roller coaster of launching this venture because you believe in it that much, or if they don't hear that emotion and that kind of energy, there maybe doesn't have that strong emotional reaction to you as a founder. And then everything else has got to hold a whole lot more weight to it and be that much stronger as you go through the presentation. So think about how to use this hero's journey through it. And the hero's journey can also be used for the customer story. So this customer story, really one single real world person, give them a name, give them a story behind it about the problem that they're facing until they found your product and what's happening now. So it's kind of a case study. What has positively impacted them by using your product, or the potential of using your product, or anything like that. Or you could talk about the customer story, and just cover the first 2 of these. You had a problem, we know what you did, you can't solve a problem. Well, there's 10 million Beths in the world. There's the opportunity. We've pointed to one individual's problem and data points of showing how big that is. Let's present her with a solution. And then back that up with, hey, I've had direct Q&A and interviews with customers or potential customers, and we are validating our solution in real time with those real customers that will be ready to purchase whenever we're ready to launch. The third one is really this industry story. So industry trends that are influencing kind of the changes in the environment, or opportunity to kind of go in there and take action and create a different solution. You see this constantly in 2020. Industry stories abound. Companies starting because of the trends and what's happening, problems that we're facing, pivoting into new business models. There's a lot of companies that are going to have a stable of stories around this to really show why there's a unique opportunity for them in this marketplace at this time, because of some of the larger forces and trends that are at play. The fourth one, venture growth story. Once you've launched, you've got some scale, or at least some traction. This is really about exciting them about, hey, we took action, we got results, look at where we're headed. it's going to be really, really big. We're going so much bigger, hockey stick growth, as everybody loves to see, and hopefully has a little bit of validation behind it because of what they've seen so far. So those 4 stories can be integrated into your deck. Not that I'm saying that all 4 need to be used, but you could use it origin on that cover, the team slides, customer story, talking about the problem and the solution, the opportunity over on the industry, and then the venture one can be integrated in a lot of different ways on your traction, competition, business model, financials. You're finding ways to excite them in there through that presentation. Okay, going into further pitch tips and tricks, we've got.
Hayden, can I actually ask, there's a couple questions that were based off the basics. Would
Okay.
you want to answer them now, or we can save them till the end?
No, let's go for it now.
Okay, cool. So from your first point of having a presentation deck and then a reading deck, somebody asked the question of, well, what if you have a presentation deck and a Word doc that is more like the detail or spec? What are your thoughts on that?
If you've got a Word doc that's essentially serving as an executive summary, that's another asset to have and tool to have available to use and send. You'll commonly hear people ask for an executive summary. It makes it easy. I mean, it makes it really easy to kind of read through, but you also will want kind of a reading style deck. It's not that one is better than the other. You kind of need both for different instances. Some entrepreneurs will get to a point where they've got probably 20 different versions of their deck, depending on the audience that they're presenting to. You're going to find yourself customizing any material that you send to the audience that's requesting it. So if you know that they are specifically asking for an executive summary, have that at the ready to send them and make any small edits that you need to. And then if they're asking for you for a pitch deck, but you're not able to present it, you have the reading deck ready to send them because that's what they're requesting and wanting. And I'm not sending them a very thin pitch deck for my presentation that they're not able to connect all the dots that I want.
Awesome. And then another question that went off the first few ones is, what is a common waste of time in those first 10 slides? Like, what should you not have included?
Common waste of time, something that's maybe fluff and a distraction. The waste of time usually comes on your story may be too long. Some presenters in startups will take a lot of time talking about the problem and hitting that lots of times before getting to the solution. Find the one problem statement that gets people to lean in and go. You can save time with more concise communication and information. It's hard to say that there's any one topic that would be fluff. It'd be the kind of go-to answer of it depends. It depends on the company and what you're trying to communicate, what stage of the company that you're in. Like at the beginning of a presentation or at the first of a round, I'm trying to raise capital. I'm looking for a lead investor. I'm hunting for that. So I may be really highlighting and trying to find the right audience for that. And so there may be some very key things I'm looking for that they know the industry because I need that on my side as a founder. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah. And then some of the other questions focus more on that part 3, the investor speak. So I'll save those for that. But the last kind of basic question that we had was, do you ever let your pitch deck get out of your hands? And if so, how do you prevent competitors from exploiting your idea?
Well, one of the tips and tricks is to create a deal room. Have a deal room that you can have accessible to those as it grows the relationship. You want to have a pitch deck that is non-confidential. Something that if it does go in front of a lot of audiences, it's practically safe. Ideas need to be shared to grow. You're going to be looking for those things. So have a non-confidential deck and a confidential deck. That the confidential deck is very controlled, not going out there just willy-nilly and sending it through email, but in a protected space that you're giving access to somebody that you've then been able to meet with, vet, check their motivation to move that forward. So the deal room can include a lot of things, and I'll cover that in the tips and tricks as well. Now, the stealing of ideas and information, It's better to have a little of something huge than all of nothing. So you're going to be sharing your idea with people, whether it's a customer or a vendor or an investor or a team member. Your ability to control the relationship, an investor specifically needs you for that role as an investor. Without deal flow, they're not an investor. It's a social club or just a hobby of looking at angel lists to try to find deals. They've got to have deal flow coming to them, or they're actively hunting it out, but they're going to be looking at the same kind of material that you're requesting. So the tip, a non-confidential deck that if it got into anybody's hands, that you feel absolutely comfortable with that level of information being shared with anybody that's learning about your company.
Perfect. Okay, we'll save the rest of the questions till the end of your presentation.
Excellent. So a couple of big tips, especially for investors. Team matters. This matters more than you think. Fill those gaps. I know I touched on it with the advisory board, but if you are a solo founder, that would be one of the biggest pieces of traction to accomplish, is to get somebody else on the team that is willing to have their name on that deck to show they're part of it, and have something of value that is different than what you are bringing to the team. So the team matters, and traction matters a lot. De-risk the investment through traction and building that moat. There's, like we talked about earlier, build that traction, have more different areas that you can show, and integrate that into your presentation to show what you've been able to achieve. Force yourself to practice in front of others and with the timer, and preferably with tough critics. You could have tough family and friend critics, find them. Less of the everything is wonderful that you do, family and friends. They're not going to give you the tough feedback of, hey, I didn't understand this point, or you made a leap into this and I couldn't follow, or you're talking too fast, or hey, I've got some real substantial questions. But this practice will allow you to track what questions come up every time I present it. So there's a strategy for anybody that's trying to raise capital. Build a list of maybe 10 to 15 angel groups, investment firms, private equity firms, whichever profile that you're trying to search for, and don't apply for your top pick out of the gate. Go to the bottom of the list and start to practice that, because they're going to give you feedback of, hey, have you thought about this? What I've got these questions that are coming up. They're then able to implement those questions and changes into your deck. So then you're honing it and improving it. So whenever you get to the top of your wish list as far as investors, you're well prepared for that. And you've gotten all of that practice out. You've gotten the feedback, you know which questions commonly come up, and you're able to integrate that into your deck so you can bypass those preliminary questions and go into more depth when you get into the discussion. So use that practice time wisely with family, friends, any colleagues and peers. Connect with other founders. Have a circle of founders that you're working with that you're able to practice with and present, because a founder will be a good credit to another founder. You'll be able to have that accountability and kind of improving it over time. But it's a living document. I mean, it will adapt and change every time that you have a presentation. And you'll think of more ideas to improve it, or to simplify it, or to add something new based on the audience that you're going to meet with. Avoid the industry speak. I know I'm repeating some of these things, but keep it simple. Speak in lay person's terms. If you do have an acronym, define it. Give the information to your audience so they're learning from it. And it's just like if you're writing in correct grammar, write it out fully the first time if you have the space, and then give the acronym and use that acronym. I know how to cheat a little bit earlier and give TAM, SAM, SUM first, just because of space requirements, and then give the full slide. So I do understand of having to kind of do that, but it's respecting the audience and being able to give that information and planning that ahead of time so that they're not like, hey, what is that? Use the data and statistics. I think it was Stanford, a study at Stanford that showed that when you use stories with your data points, it had the opportunity to increase retention from your audience up to 75%. 75% of the information that you were sharing had the possibility of being retained from your audience versus if you're just sharing data or a story by itself. So give something measurable that people can grasp onto. They'll remember that, and whenever you get in the question, it's always painful to watch and experience. If you give a presentation for 10 minutes, you share all these data points, and then the first question is about something that you just presented, just to repeat the thing that you shared. That means your audience wasn't able to listen throughout all of the presentation. There was a distraction moment. What did they miss? Take it as an opportunity to say, okay, they missed this point. What was I doing when that happened? What did I share before and after? What allowed them? I mean, they maybe just gotten distracted because they were thinking about, oh, this is a great opportunity and I like the team and I totally missed what you were talking about on your customer acquisition strategy. So they may just be distracted. So like I said earlier, don't get defensive. See it as an opportunity to clarify and maybe go even deeper on that. If they're asking you to repeat something that you've already shared, have some other data point that you can share about it to go a little bit deeper than what you presented in the presentation. Talked about it earlier, create the appendix slides. Use these during Q&A for everything that doesn't fit based on time constraints. And it's also helpful to have appendix slides, especially if you have something very technical in those slides, in the appendix. Don't bombard your listeners with a lot of technical pieces in the presentation itself. Save that for the Q&A, because what you're able to do is you discover who in the audience is very technically focused. And big tip, I'm amazed that I've started to talk to entrepreneurs about this. We actually just did invitations to Cowtown Angels today. And I'm like, okay, we're in Zoom. I can see all your names. And I could probably trust that it's your real name. So if I'm paying attention of like in the chat and the Q&A and anybody unmuting of who's asking really pertinent, important, or challenging questions, I can write your name down and I can look at LinkedIn. I can write you, thank you for the tough, challenging questions. It's gotten me thinking, here's a response to that question if I didn't have an answer in the session itself. So while you're in a Zoom or any other environment, if people's names are on there, if you're allowed 2 founders in the presentation, one founder should just be watching what's happening in the chat, who's asking which questions, and who's unmuting and asking which questions, because if they understand your industry, they're asking more advanced questions. They really are connecting the dots about it and they're excited, they're asking questions. So use that to your benefit whenever you're in the virtual environment. I know it's harder in person whenever it's like, oh, they got a little tiny name tag and they're 30 feet away. I don't have great eyesight, so I definitely understand that challenge. Oh, okay, so I went too fast on this one. So don't do these. Don't do transitions. These are painful to watch when you need to go back. I mean, you can fast track it by clicking, but oh man, a slide deck full of transitions. I have been known prior to a presentation, sitting there with the founder, everybody's in the room, and I will just absolutely delete all their transitions before they go live. Because I'm like, no, I'm not gonna let you crash and burn like that. And it's painful for the audience as much as it is for the entrepreneur. So just avoid them. Now, if you're populating new information on there, onto the slide, like, hey, I don't want to display everything all at once, I'm kind of okay with that. Deliver one piece of information and then have another piece appear on there. I don't treat that as a transition from slide to slide. It's mostly slow rolling that information so I don't overwhelm my audience, so they can keep pace with what I'm presenting. So I don't go, hey, here's 3 data points that are all about the same thing. Maybe I need to pace myself, and I display it one at a time to allow them to digest that as I tell the story about each of those data pieces. So okay with those, but avoid those transitions from slide to slides. Q&A time is equally important. We have seen companies crash and burn during the Q&A, sometimes because they get defensive, sometimes because they're just long-winded and they talk way too long. They don't give enough time for a lot of the questions that are coming. And so if somebody's feeling like they've got a good question and they don't ever get the chance to because you talked for 10 minutes during a 10-minute Q&A, they may disengage. They may go, oh, well, I've got to prioritize. That may not be the deal for me. But the Q&A is a really key time because you get to show yourself even more than in the presentation. You're less practiced. You're going to be showing who you are as an individual during that time. And so practice Q&A. As much as you practice the presentation, practice the Q&A with somebody. Again, with tough critics, people that will ask you tough questions, probing, hypothetical questions, and record yourself. Record what you do during a Q&A session. What's the body language that I present? Are there visual tics that I do whenever I'm getting defensive, or do I fill time with a bunch of filler words? So if somebody asks a question and I say, oh, that's a great question, I've just bought a little bit more time to think about what I want to answer. There was actually an interview last week that I was conducting with a fellow member of Cowtown Angels, and the individual responding to the questions did the exact opposite. They absolutely paused, didn't say a thing for maybe 10 seconds, and then gave the answer. It was a little long on the pause, but I respected not just filling it with like, oh, that's a great question. I've never thought about that before. Let me think about it. Well, you've just said things that distracted you from actually thinking about it. So practice that, record it, video yourself of what you do during the Q&A. But to help you with that, we actually have a book, 202 Questions Investors Could Ask You Before Investing in a Startup. It's free. Download it, cowtownangels.org. If you can answer all of those in very concise, constructive ways, you're probably ready to get in front of an audience of angel investors and do a presentation and get into some Q&A. Know the deal terms like the back of your hand. Even if you don't have the slide up there, if they ask you that question and to repeat it, be able to list that off very seamlessly. I've actually seen some fumbling on this over the years, and it becomes a distraction point to some of the investors, and just that you're not ready for, what they say, the big time. Just know what those terms are, be able to speak that language. So there's a lot of resources that you can do, is it like the entrepreneurs and the service providers in the room to send people, especially if they're going the angel capital kind of way. Recommend them to go to the Angel Capital Association. Lots of free resources there. Free resources for entrepreneurs and investors. Entrepreneurs, go to the investor page first and learn what the investors are learning, then see what they're actually telling you as an entrepreneur of what you should be learning. There's a book by David Rose, not from Schitt's Creek, but from New York Angels, that wrote Angel Investing. It's just kind of a how-to guide in angel investing, and many angel investors are reading that as they get into it. So if you want a longer form book, check that one out. It's still pretty low cost on booksellers. Support local. You don't always have to go to Amazon. That's a good book to check out. So David Rose, Angel Investing. I forget the full one. It's like a Gust guide to angel investing. So this one is a tip that I will leave you. Actually, I got a couple more slides, and I know we're getting close on time and probably some more questions, but create a pitch kit. So what I mean by this, and the pitch kit is really increasing now that you're virtual, but in my backpack at all times, I have this little sack that's got my clicker. I've got a name tag. I've got even a converting cable for those Apple users. I've got flashcard or flash drives that I can use if I am supposed to be bringing my slides. I can use that on a flash drive. I can send it through email. I can send it through Dropbox or Google Drive. I got my name tag. As a glasses wearer, I have a repair kit for my glasses. I usually have a backup set of batteries and a dry erase marker. Now, our everyday pitch kit increases by having a great microphone and good light source if we're presenting on a virtual setting. So grab a good microphone and record yourself, and then play that back to hear how your audio plays out. Hear yourself. I know it's painful sometimes to hear yourself, but just hear what your audio sounds like to your listeners. It can be pretty disruptive, and especially if it comes in and out, or if it's quiet or crackled, that feedback can be distracting to your listener. They're going to retain less. So small investment for those that are going to be presenting. I use mine even still probably every other week at some point. With this, I don't need the clicker. I'm just using my keyboard. But create that deal room, cloud storage. You could even do it to where it's password protected and time sensitive as far as when they gain access to that. But company founding documents, projections and plans, team bios, all the legal documents that you have, something that if somebody's wanting to conduct due diligence on your company to do an investment, then it makes it really easy for you to share it with them and that you're prepared and organized in that way. It's always painful, kind of like just sending emails back and forth of documents, having one place that you're loading in. Because when you have a deal room, and especially if it's password protected, you're capturing the emails for everybody that's going in there, or you're at least getting the emails for everybody that's gaining access. So for us, I will never give the names and emails to somebody, to one of our presenters that's just done the presentation and moved into a deep dive. It's not the time to share it. The members will reach out individually if they are interested in it. But the process is once they get into the due diligence, if they got a deal room, boom, emails. That's the best way to get all of them at the same time, to have that direct contact with them and move that forward. So there's a couple of investor speak. Actually, Devin, do we have questions from that section? I hadn't had the chat open.
Yeah, we do have a couple questions from the investors speak. Yeah, we can start with those if you want and then fill in whatever isn't covered from the questions.
Let me see. So I've got some questions about do you build for companies and would you pitch for them? No, I will not. I am not for hire in that capacity. I will coach entrepreneurs in building them and give direct feedback to pitch decks and do that almost daily. So always down for that. And it's always subjective. My opinion is going to be different than somebody else's. So getting others' opinions is key to see how they synthesize that information and get that going. Devin, any other questions?
Yeah, so one of them was submitted in an email and they asked, how do you make virtual opportunities appealing to investors?
Ooh, interesting. Well, if you're inviting them into your room, like in a Zoom room, then, I mean, just being really savvy and comfortable with the environment, being able to pull things up, use it to its full benefit. I'm being lazy because Devin was covering the chat, and so I'm not having to play that responsibility tonight. Delegation, I am practicing that as a leader. And so find ways to be engaging, change it up a little bit. If you have a demo, whether that's a kind of a real demo on camera or a visual, if you're playing a video, practice that, but also don't have audio. Play a video with no audio so you can communicate over that and continue to have a conversation. It keeps them engaged and not just passively just watching a 1.5 minute video. They're watching while they also listen to you. They're tapping into kind of multitasking within that and engaged with what's going on and hearing from you. So that's one strategy to keep investors engaged or an audience engaged within your presentation. If you have a video displaying kind of how it works and functions or direct feedback from kind of the use of it. So hopefully that helps.
Awesome. And then Hayden, I know we've talked about this before, but when you are pitching virtually, do you advise people to have their cameras on?
Yes, cameras on. Definitely have that. Have good lighting, have good microphone. Be comfortable. I mean, default usually is going to be you're getting into a waiting room and you're going to be muted. So being able to unmute, be able to do that. Always have somebody else on your team on the presentation with you. If you've got them to be able to help you, like Devin's helping on the chat, it's going to help you stay focused on what you're presenting and flow with that. So there's probably some other ideas. Those that comes to mind.
Awesome. And then Allison had some really good ones about VC. She just had to hop off, but I think let's ask one of them because I think it's kind of important. So, should your first pitch with a VC firm be different than the second pitch you have with the same VC firm?
Definitely. It depends on the length of the engagement the first time, of how much depth you're able to go into, of what they're setting. They may say, hey, it's highly structured. We want to hear your pitch, and then we want to do Q&A. They may just be like, well, we're going to have an hour meeting and you're going to pull up your slides, and we have a conversation about each of those slides and start to dive into it immediately into it. So it depends on what that first experience was, because it's going to change based on what that conversation covered. If they really honed in on one area and you want to explore that more. So like, for instance, like with Cowtown Angels, we do the forum, 10-minute presentation, 10-minute Q&A, and then companies that move forward go into the deep dive. They do 1 hour. We give the first 5 minutes to the entrepreneur to touch on things that they didn't get to touch on the prior week and expand on the areas that questions were asked. So they're already shaping what they're going to cover in that next meeting, if it was time crunched on the first one and longer on the second. So as much as you can absorb from the audience the first time of where they focused on, but also areas that they maybe didn't focus on, if you have an opportunity to get up there and present to them again of like, hey, we really went into depth in this area. Here's what I found. But I also wanted to touch on these other areas that we didn't get to touch on as much last time. And we have additional documentation showing these. So those are my thoughts.
Awesome. And then we're right at time, and I think that kind of covers the highest level questions that we had in. Do you want to wrap up with anything that those investor questions didn't go over?
Just a few things. Let me on that. Get to know these terms. If you're going the angel route, cap table, price round, convertible note, company evaluation. Lots of resources at the ACA, the Angel Capital Association, due diligence, deal room, syndication, follow-on rounds. Know the language of those angels because they will use it. They probably won't respect, and they're going to assume that you're also learning that fast track. So there's lots of new terminology if you're going that route, is for capital raising. But yeah, those are the areas. So here's my contact information. Always open to looking at pitch decks, always looking for deal flow coming into Cowtown Angels, looking for good deals, looking for dollars, but it's individual decisions on those investments. So we have very little sway in how they select and choose and which deals they move forward with. But all this information is not just exclusively for presenting to an angel investor. It's for getting in front of, I want to bring on a new team member and I want to show them what I'm building and how this all maps out. I want to get a mentor and I'm growing this relationship and I want to present to them and get some growth in that relationship. I want to get people involved in my vision in some capacity and need to give them a walkthrough on this. I may be getting family and friends to invest in the company. There's a lot of different instances that you would be needing to use what we call a pitch deck or just a presentation. So no, I covered a lot in this. We have the recording. We'll definitely share the slides as you can use those. So thank you, everybody. And it's been a pleasure.